A Toyota Supra from a 2001 movie just sold for $550,000, about 6 times what the real car is worth. That's the kind of money on the table with Fast and Furious, and today we're going through its most famous cars one by one, what the movies got wrong about each of them, and why it's still affecting real prices right now. Number 8. 2 scenes that don't even follow their own movie's logic. Quick one before we get into specific cars, because 2 of this franchise's most famous moments don't hold up even by the movie's own internal rules. First, the opening heist of the original film, where modified Honda Civics duck underneath a moving semi-truck trailer to dodge a road crew. Great shot, genuinely impossible. Production semi-trailers don't have that kind of ground clearance, and they're built with underride guards, steel bars running along the sides and rear, specifically engineered to stop a vehicle from sliding underneath in exactly this scenario. Even the lowest, most slammed Civic on Earth isn't fitting under one. The franchise liked the shot enough to repeat it in Furious 7, with the same problem. Then there's Tokyo Drift, a movie all about an American teenager getting absorbed into Japan's drift racing scene, whose climactic build is, of all things, a vintage Mustang fitted with a Nissan engine. Car enthusiasts have picked this scene apart for years, and the basic issue is simple. Dropping one manufacturer's engine into a decades-old chassis from a completely different make isn't a weekend swap. It's custom mounts, custom wiring, custom everything. And the movie treats it like snapping in a new phone battery. Number 7. Danger to manifold isn't a real warning. If you've spent any time in car forums over the last 20 years, you've seen this phrase used as a punchline more times than you can count. Danger to manifold. It's from the first movie's opening street race. Right as Brian's Eclipse hits its nitrous, his laptop flashes that exact warning, and seconds later his floor panel rips loose mid-race. Here's the part that took years to surface. According to Craig Lieberman, the film's actual technical advisor, this was a known compromise from day one. His suggestion was something realistic: a nitrous bottle pressure gauge or a turbo boost gauge spiking into the red. Director Rob Cohen overruled him, betting the audience wouldn't know the difference between a real gauge and a made-up warning. He was right. It took the internet most of 2 decades to turn danger to manifold into shorthand for "this build is about to grenade," a phrase that now shows up under YouTube comments and Instagram posts of blown engines that have nothing to do with this movie at all. In the real world, a stressed intake manifold doesn't pop up a dashboard alert. Depending on the failure, it cracks, it leaks vacuum, or, in a genuinely bad nitrous situation, like running too much bottle pressure without enough fuel to match it, you get detonation that can melt a piston straight through. That's a 5-figure repair bill, not a laptop notification. Number 6. The wing didn't do what you think it did. This one's less about a specific car and more about the entire aesthetic this franchise exported to the real world. The oversized rear wings, the body kits, the underglow, the NOS bottle stickers. For an entire generation, that look became the visual shorthand for fast. The problem is that, on the street, almost none of it is doing what the movie implies. A wing like the ones on Brian's Eclipse or that orange Supra is designed to generate downforce, extra grip, and meaningful downforce from a wing that size doesn't really show up until you're well into triple-digit speeds. The kind of speeds these builds rarely see outside of a closed drag strip, let alone on a public street. At the speeds most owners actually drive, an oversized wing isn't adding grip. If anything, it's adding drag and weight, working against the acceleration the movie is trying to sell you on. This is also where car culture's old all-show, no-go put-down comes from. A car dressed for a race, it's not actually built to win. And it's a myth with real financial consequences. Body kits, wings, and underglow became a multi-million-dollar accessory industry built on the implication that looking like the movie cars meant performing like them. For most owners, it meant spending real money on parts that, at the speeds they'd realistically drive, were doing close to nothing. Number 5. Brian's Eclipse never had the turbo it bragged about. Here's the car that launched 1,000 body kits, and it was lying to you the entire time. In the movie, the resident car geek character pops the hood on Brian's green Mitsubishi Eclipse and rattles off the spec sheet. Cold air intake, NOS fogger system, direct port nitrous, and a T4 turbo. 2 out of 4 of those are true. According to Craig Lieberman's own documented build sheets, he's the technical advisor who actually sourced this car for the production. It wasn't the turbocharged, all-wheel drive Eclipse GSX that everyone assumes. It was a base GS model running the naturally aspirated 420A engine, a 2.0-liter 4-cylinder with no turbo, period, with a cold air intake, an aftermarket header, and a bored-out throttle body. Different write-ups citing Lieberman's numbers put it somewhere between 125 and 140 horsepower at the crank, basically identical to a base Honda Civic from the same era. That gap has real consequences. For 2 decades, owner forums have been full of people who specifically went hunting for GSX trim Eclipses because of this movie, assuming the screen car was the turbo all-wheel drive version, only to discover the GSX is rarer, more expensive, and was never actually the car they were trying to recreate in the first place. As for that 10-second car reputation we're about to get into, real-world testing of a build like this lands somewhere around 14 to 16 seconds in the quarter mile, depending on which of Lieberman's own breakdowns you're reading. Either number is a long way from 10. Number 4, the 10-second car was never a 10-second car. Quick translation for anyone who's never been to a drag strip. A quarter-mile time is how long it takes a car to cover 402 meters from a dead stop, and anything in the 10-second range is genuinely elite for a street car. Serious horsepower to weight, not just a cold air intake and a sticker. That number is the emotional backbone of the entire first movie. Dom's arc ends with Brian handing him the keys to a Supra, calling it the 10-second car he's owed. One of the most quoted lines in the franchise's closing moments. Except, based on everything we've covered and Lieberman's own numbers for these builds, nothing in this lineup was actually running 10s. We're talking low to mid 13 seconds on a great day for the quickest car here, and considerably worse for the others. Case in point, Jesse's VW Jetta, built purely as a show car with about 150 horsepower, needed roughly 18 seconds to cover the quarter mile, slower than a lot of minivans. In the actual on-screen race, the S2000 versus that Jetta took close to 25 seconds to cross the line, which is slower than a 1960s Austin Mini Cooper. And here's the kicker, more than 2 decades later, in 2022, Toyota's own motorsports team built 2 genuinely 10-second Supras for SEMA as a direct tribute to this exact moment. And even starting from a modern Supra that already runs a 12.1-second quarter-mile stock, they needed real money and real engineering to crack that 10-second mark. 2 decades on, and 10 seconds is still something Toyota has to work for. It was never a spec. It was always a vibe. Number 3, Dom's 900 horsepower Charger engine never touched the road. Dom's black 1970 Charger RT might be the single most iconic car in the entire franchise. The story is that his father built it with a supercharged 528 cubic inch Hemi, rated at 900 horsepower, plus a 250 horsepower nitrous shot stacked on top. A claimed 1,100 horsepower total and a 9-second quarter mile, with Dom saying the torque was enough to twist the chassis off the line. Here's the timeline of what actually happened. In 2001, that 528 Hemi was a non-running showpiece, bolted in just long enough for the garage reveal close-ups, then shipped back to the company that built it. The Chargers actually driven on camera that year ran 440 Magnum V8s instead. By the 2010s, as the franchise kept building new Chargers for new films, the production had moved on to GMLS 3-crate engines for its stunt cars entirely. Easier to source, easier to maintain, and frankly, easier to keep in one piece. Fast forward to the 2020s, when a shop called Just Driven tried to build the real version for the first time. Their first attempt landed at 727 horsepower and 941 pound-feet. already enough to twist a 1970 unibody chassis under hard acceleration. They went back, retuned, and settled around 840 horsepower at the wheels just to keep it drivable. 20-plus years and a full generation of engineering later, and the real Charger still tops out shy of the number the movie threw around in Scene 1. Number 2, the franchise quietly stopped being about cars. Here's the uncomfortable trend line. The first movie's biggest sins were a fake turbo and a made-up dashboard warning. Small stuff, the kind of thing a real car can technically still do. By 2011's Fast 5, cars are dragging a literal bank vault through the streets of Rio behind them. By 2015's Furious 7, they're jumping between 2 skyscrapers in Abu Dhabi. By 2017's The Fate of the Furious, Dom is outrunning a nuclear submarine across an ice sheet. And by 2021's F9, the franchise sends a Pontiac Fiero into outer space. It's not just the stunts that got bigger, the cars did too. The same franchise that built its identity on 4-cylinder imports with bolt-on turbos spent the 2010s swapping those cars out for actual Lamborghinis, Bugattis, and military-grade armored trucks. The wings and underglow from a few minutes ago didn't just become less believable, they became less present, period, as the franchise's own taste shifted toward exotics it once would have mocked. That F9 magnet sequence got enough attention that actual physicists weighed in publicly. A physics professor at McGill University pointed out that if you apply a force to pull an object toward you, that object applies an equal force back, meaning both things move toward each other, not just the smaller one, which isn't how the scene plays out. A separate astrophysicist broke down why the movie's flip a switch to repel everything version doesn't track with how magnetic fields actually behave. Even an actual astronaut got asked to grade the space sequence. He gave it credit for one small detail and let the rest of it speak for itself. None of this is really about getting an engine wrong anymore. A franchise that started as a love letter to real tuner culture, real engines, real quarter-mile numbers, even when those numbers were fudged in the production's favor, spent 2 decades drifting toward a world where the car could be anything. A submarine fighter, a flying tank, a spaceship. The specs stopped mattering because somewhere around movie 6 or 7, the cars stopped being cars. Number 1, the Fast and Furious tax. Here's why everything on this list actually matters, even if you've never watched a single one of these movies and never plan to. Hagerty, the company that basically writes the book on collector car values, ran the numbers on what these specific cars were worth in 2001, the year the first movie came out, versus what they're worth today. The 1995 Mitsubishi Eclipse GSX, the car Brian's Eclipse was supposed to be, even though it wasn't, is up about 74%. The 1994 Toyota Supra Turbo, the car that becomes the 10-second car that wasn't, is up roughly 279%. For context, the Honda S2000 from the same movie, a genuinely great car that just didn't get the same mythology attached to it, is actually down slightly over the same period. Same era, same scene, wildly different outcomes, and the difference comes down to which car got the legend attached to it. Now here's where it gets real. One of the actual stunt cars from the first film, the Supra Paul Walker himself drove on camera, sold at a Barrett-Jackson auction in 2022 for $550,000. At the time, a clean, ordinary 94 Supra Turbo in excellent condition was valued at around $92,000. That's roughly 6 times the going rate for a car that mechanically is just a Supra, and the big one isn't even an outlier in its own category. The R34 Skyline GTR, used in Fast and Furious 4, sold at auction in 2023 for $1.357 million. The most expensive Skyline GTR ever sold, period. This is a car that, under normal import rules, still can't legally hit American roads. It's sitting in Germany, and it's not the first time an R34 has carried a price tag like that. Back in the early 2000s, before the 25-year import rule made these cars legal in the US, a company called Motorex was already selling federalized R34s to American buyers for north of $400,000 each. For a car that, brand new in Japan would have cost a fraction of that. Craig Lieberman has pointed out that the R34's price climb owes even more to this franchise than the Supra's does, partly because most Americans had never seen one in person before it showed up in Too Fast, Too Furious. That's the real story. Every fake spec, every made-up warning light, every 10-second car that never ran a 10, none of it stopped these cars from becoming some of the most desirable vehicles on the planet. If anything, it's the opposite. The myths are the reason the prices went up. So if you've been pricing out a clean Eclipse GSX or a 90s Super Turbo recently, and the number didn't make sense for the car you were actually looking at, now you know you're not paying for the car. You're paying for a movie that got almost everything about it technically wrong and never stopped being right about who'd want it anyway. And that's really the through line for this whole video. What you believe about a car, whether it's a movie myth or just something you read on a forum, can completely disconnect from what's actually sitting under the hood. And that gap can cost you real money. If you want to see where that gap is hiding in cars being sold right now, not in a movie from 2001, go watch 10 engines mechanics are begging you to avoid in 2026 next. Some of those reputations are just as overblown or just as deserved as everything we covered today, and it could save you from your own personal Fast and Furious tax.